What was the most important takeaway from the Treasury Secretary's remarks?
Well, unfortunately, what investors really wanted to know was any little nugget about those Chinese tariffs and whether or not they might go away sometime soon. And so what we learned is that we still don't have an answer on that. Not really surprising, but any sort of mention around the easing up of those tariffs would be very welcome by investors who are just completely exhausted of watching this whole thing.
Why, Stephanie, do you think it is that, he could have said, well, yes, of course, when we reach this agreement, those tariffs were leveraged to come to this agreement, therefore they sunset. But he specifically did not say that. So is the conclusion that those tariffs will persist?
I think it's one of the biggest parts of negotiations, obviously, in terms of the leverage here. There's clearly things that are not completely worked out. Otherwise, we'd have a deal at this point. So why make the announcement until the whole thing is done? And also maybe you let the president make that announcement.
Sure. And Brian, if that's the case, as far as the market's concerned, one major issue, a headwind for growth or maybe a headwind for some particular consumers and businesses could remain. Now, the Treasury Secretary said, look, this deal is going to be I think he said, the most significant deal between the U.S. and China in 40 years. Will the opening on that front, or maybe the reassurance about intellectual property and otherwise, do more to help the U.S. economy than the potential hurt of tariffs remaining on?
Yeah, I think it's asymmetric. I think the removing of tariffs at least will boost the markets more than. Let me back up. I think the removing of the tariffs will help the markets. The removing of the tariffs helping the economy longer term probably is a good thing. But the intellectual property component of these negotiations really over the longest term is the most significant. So you have the short-term tariffs, which are, if you get rid of them, positive, but longer term, if you talk to U.S. businesses, the thing they're most concerned about is the intellectual property protection and technology transfer theft that comes from China. So I think that's a bigger issue for the economy longer term.
Stephanie, talk to us a little bit. On the one hand, China tariffs may go away, but new tariffs may come in place on European goods, and also NAFTA, or not NAFTA, I should call it the USMCA. That is no sure thing in Congress, and that could create some trade headaches as well.
Exactly, and we heard Secretary Mnuchin tell Sara that Nancy Pelosi needs to bring this to the floor. I mean, the administration, this being the USMCA, that the administration has negotiated this deal with Mexico and Canada, and why can't the House just start voting so that the Congress can ratify this, essentially? Investors are now familiar with this administration's negotiating tactics. If they don't get something they want from another country, they will threaten tariffs or threaten some other punitive actions that the business community and investors certainly don't like. And while they may want to shrug it off and just acknowledge this is how this administration works, we saw last night there was a sell-off at the end of the day with the threat of these new EU tariffs, which is just ongoing uncertainty. It's not the investor's friend.
Brian, I realize the hearings are still underway. That's the parallel issue today on the Hill. But just thought I'd ask you, as we stand so far, whether you think there's any real headlines or any policy moves that are likely to come of this.
No, I think today we're just seeing a lot of political noise. There's a lot of political grandstanding. The issues that have been covered really are not related to bank regulatory policy. Those were the few exception questions on regulatory policy. If investors are looking for changes in the regulatory environment, it's really a post-2020 event. The administration's regulatory agenda remains in place despite the rhetoric from the Hill until the election. And of course, if the president's reelected, then it remains in place, and Democrats really are not in a powerful position to change that. So it's negative headlines for some of them, and it's embarrassing moments for some CEOs when they're placed in the spotlight. But at the end of the day, to answer your question, policy does not change, and I didn't sense any shift in the debate today that would signal a policy shift. It's all political noise.